My Apache neighbor got jealous seeing a girl kiss me. I told her, if you want, your turn next. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, and the air smelled faintly of blooming flowers mixed with the earthy scent after a recent rain. It was the kind of evening that made him feel calm, almost like the world had slowed down just for him. He walked slowly down the street, hands in his pockets, thinking about nothing in particular when he spotted her. She was standing near the small park at the end of the street, laughing softly at something on her phone. Her hair caught the last rays of the sun, making it shine like gold, and her smile was warm and natural. Armin had met her a few weeks ago, and they had quickly grown comfortable with each other. There was something easy about her presence, a lightness that made him laugh even when he didn't feel like it. Tonight, they had planned to take a short walk together, talk, and just enjoy the evening air. As Armin approached, she looked up and smiled. That smile had a way of making him forget everything else. They greeted each other casually, but there was an unspoken excitement between them, a tiny spark that had begun to grow in the last few weeks. They walked side by side, their conversation flowing effortlessly. They talked about small things, favorite movies, childhood memories, funny incidents, but there was also a deeper sense of understanding. They didn't feel the need to fill every silence with words because the silences themselves were comfortable. The park was nearly empty that evening, and the sound of leaves rustling in the wind added a soft, natural music to their walk. Armin noticed how her eyes lit up when she talked about things she loved, and he found himself staring a little longer than usual. He didn't mean to, it just happened. There was something mesmerizing about the way she expressed herself, the way her voice carried a mix of playfulness and sincerity. As they reached a small wooden bench near a fountain, they decided to sit down for a while. Water trickled gently from the fountain, creating tiny ripples in the shallow pool, and the air was cool enough to make them shiver slightly. Armin noticed she had tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a small gesture that made his heart beat a little faster. He wasn't sure why, but it made him feel closer to her, like this quiet moment was theirs alone. Without thinking much, he leaned slightly closer and she looked at him with a curious smile. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. It wasn't a dramatic or overly romantic scene. It was natural, almost effortless. And then it happened. Their lips met in a gentle, playful kiss. It was soft and fleeting, not rushed or exaggerated, but it carried a warmth that made Armin feel a strange mix of excitement and calm all at once. She laughed softly afterward, her cheeks tinged with pink, and he couldn't help but laugh too. "What was that?" she asked, trying to sound casual though her smile betrayed her amusement. "Just seeing if it was as fun as it looked," Armin replied, grinning. They laughed together, the kind of laugh that makes you forget all worries, all rules, all the little stresses of everyday life. It was a perfect, small moment, one that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. But as they continued sitting there, enjoying the comfortable silence that followed, Armin noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye. From the porch of the house across the street, someone was watching them. He squinted and his heart skipped a beat when he recognized the figure. It was Lila, his neighbor. She had always been friendly, always polite when they spoke, but there was usually a quiet distance between them. Tonight, however, the distance seemed to shrink in a way that was confusing. Lila's eyes were wide, her expression a mix of surprise and something else, something Armin couldn't quite place immediately. He felt a strange jolt in his chest, a sense of awareness he hadn't expected. Why was she watching them so closely? He tried to focus on the girl beside him, to ignore the figure on the porch, but a part of his mind kept drifting toward her. Lila was someone who lived nearby, someone he had seen almost every day, yet tonight she seemed different, almost tense. He decided not to mention it to the girl, not wanting to ruin the light-hearted mood. Instead, he turned his attention back to the conversation, joking about something silly that had happened at work that day. She laughed, and the sound felt like music, bright and clear against the evening air. Yet Armin couldn't fully shake the feeling of being observed. He wondered why Leela had chosen that exact moment to stand there, why her presence made the air feel slightly heavier, and why a part of him felt a strange curiosity mixed with guilt, maybe. The girl noticed him glancing occasionally in the direction of the porch and followed his gaze. "Is someone there?" she asked, her tone playful but curious. "Just a neighbor," he replied casually, shrugging. Nothing to worry about. But he couldn't help thinking about Leela's expression, the way her eyes had lingered on them, the faint furrow of her brows, the subtle tightening of her lips. It wasn't anger or sadness exactly. It was something more complicated, something he would later realize was jealousy. They continued their walk after a few more minutes on the bench, moving past the fountain and down the cobblestone path that led to the quieter end of the park. The girl kept talking about her favorite book series, animatedly describing characters and plot twists, and Armin listened intently, smiling at her excitement. Still, every now and then, his attention drifted to Leela's house across the street. She had moved slightly, still standing at the porch but now clearly observing them with a sharper focus. Armin wondered what had caused her sudden interest. Leela had always been polite, maybe even friendly in small doses, but she had never been the type to linger to watch. Something about the kiss, he realized, must have triggered this. Perhaps she hadn't expected to see him with someone else, someone new. Perhaps her feelings were more complicated than he had understood. They eventually reached a small cafe at the corner of the park, a place that stayed open late and served warm drinks with a cozy atmosphere. They decided to sit there for a while, ordering tea and pastries, and Armin tried to push the thoughts of Leela out of his mind. He focused on the girl beside him, the warmth of the cup in his hands, the comforting hum of quiet conversation around them. But even as he laughed at her jokes and shared small anecdotes from his life, he couldn't help but replay the moment on the porch in his mind. After a while, they decided to head back, walking slowly as the night grew darker. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement, and the air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Armin felt a mix of excitement and unease, emotions that were tangled together in a way that was both confusing and thrilling. He realized that tonight was more than just a casual walk or a playful kiss. It was a moment that had shifted something in his small world, something he didn't fully understand yet. When they reached the corner where the girl would take a different path home, she paused and smiled at him. "Tonight was really nice," she said softly. Armin nodded, feeling the truth of her words in his chest. "It really was," he replied. They shared one last glance before parting ways, and as he watched her disappear down the street, he felt a strange mixture of happiness and anticipation, knowing that the night's events would linger in his mind longer than he expected. Only then did he turn his attention to Leela's porch once more. She was gone now, vanished into her house, but the memory of her gaze stayed with him. He didn't yet know how it would affect the days to come, or how it might change their relationship, but he sensed that something had shifted. Something had begun, quietly, in the background of a simple evening. And Armin, for all his calm and careful nature, felt the first stirrings of a story that would become far more complicated and far more interesting than he could have imagined. After that evening, Armin couldn't stop thinking about Leela. Something about the way she had looked at him from her porch lingered in his mind. It wasn't anger or disapproval. No, it was something subtler, something harder to define. There was curiosity, yes, but also a flicker of jealousy. That word alone made him pause. Jealousy wasn't something he expected from Leela. She had always been polite, distant, the kind of neighbor who smiled when passing by but rarely engaged beyond small talk. And yet that night, her gaze had followed him and the girl, intense and unyielding, almost as if she were studying them. Over the next few days, Armin noticed small changes in her behavior. She would appear suddenly while he was doing simple things, watering his plants, fixing something outside, or even just stepping out for fresh air. At first, he thought it was a coincidence, or that she simply liked being outdoors at the same time. But the longer it went on, the clearer it became that she was paying attention to him in a new way. Sometimes, she would glance his way and quickly look away, as if she hadn't been looking at all. Other times she lingered, her eyes following him a moment longer than necessary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Armin, who had always been observant, it was impossible to ignore. He started wondering what she was thinking. Did she know he had kissed the girl? Had she seen it clearly or just caught a glimpse? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, yet a small, nagging part of his mind kept whispering that something was different now. Meanwhile, the girl he had kissed seemed unaware of the tension brewing nearby. They continued to meet, laughing and talking, sharing small adventures in the quiet neighborhood. Armin enjoyed her company more than ever, but a part of him was distracted. Whenever they walked past Leela's house or saw her nearby, he could feel the subtle weight of her gaze, and it changed the way he interacted with both of them. One afternoon, Armin decided to go for a short walk to clear his mind. The sun was high and the heat made the streets shimmer slightly. As he stepped outside, he noticed Leela standing near her front gate, seemingly busy with something, though the moment he approached, her head lifted and she caught his eye. She froze for a second, as if caught in a private thought, and then quickly looked away. Armin smiled politely and waved, and she returned a small, hesitant nod. There was a tension between them now that hadn't existed before, a kind of silent conversation that neither had spoken aloud. He didn't know what to make of it. Was it irritation, curiosity, or something else entirely? He decided to let it be, thinking that perhaps time would reveal her true feelings. The next day, as he was sitting on his small balcony enjoying a cup of tea, he noticed her again. She was in her yard, watering her plants, but her eyes kept flicking in his direction. It was impossible to ignore. Armin's thoughts drifted to the evening in the park, to the soft laughter and the fleeting kiss. He realized that Leela's attention had changed, that her presence was no longer just background noise in his life. She was now part of the story, silently, almost invisibly, shaping the atmosphere around him. He began to notice patterns. Whenever he spent time with the girl, Leela would appear nearby in some way. Sometimes she was across the street, trimming her hedges, standing under the shade of a tree. Sometimes she was walking her dog, always careful to pass by at the exact moment he was outside. It wasn't harassment or anything overt. It was subtle, almost playful in its own way, but it carried a clear message. She was aware and she was watching. Armin didn't feel threatened, but he did feel curious. He wondered what it was about him that had captured her attention so suddenly. And more than curiosity, there was a strange feeling of anticipation. He began to look forward to those moments, to the quiet acknowledgement in her eyes, even if it made his stomach flutter nervously. There was something intriguing about the tension, something that made the ordinary days feel more alive. One evening, he met the girl again near the same park where they had shared the kiss. They walked slowly, enjoying the soft glow of the streetlights, talking about everything and nothing. But this time, Leela appeared in the distance, walking along the opposite side of the street. She didn't approach, didn't say a word, but Armin could feel her presence. The way she moved, the way her eyes followed him, made him wonder how deep her feelings truly were. The girl noticed him glancing occasionally and asked, "Is she your friend?" "Yes, sort of," Armin replied carefully. "Just a neighbor." He didn't want to explain too much, not wanting to complicate the evening. But in truth, he couldn't deny that her behavior had sparked curiosity in him. He didn't know what to expect next, and part of him wanted to understand it fully. Over the next few days, their interactions continued, and Armin began to notice Leela's jealousy becoming more apparent. It wasn't aggressive or confrontational, it was subtle. A sharp intake of breath when he laughed with the girl, a faint tightening of her lips when she passed by, a quick glance that lingered just a second too long. It was the kind of behavior that could easily be overlooked, but for someone as observant as Armin, it was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, he saw her sitting on her porch, pretending to read a book, but her eyes were focused on him. She seemed conflicted, almost torn between wanting to watch him and wanting to hide her feelings. Armin felt a strange mixture of emotions, amusement, curiosity, and a growing sense of responsibility. He didn't want to hurt her, but he also didn't want to ignore what was happening. There was a story unfolding here, a quiet, slow-moving drama that demanded careful attention. He began to reflect on Leela's past behavior. She had always been friendly, offering small smiles and greetings, but she had kept a distance. Now that distance was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. It was as if she had been waiting for something to happen, something to spark her emotions, and the kiss in the park had been that trigger. Armin realized that the situation was delicate. It required sensitivity, understanding, and perhaps a little playfulness to navigate without creating tension. One evening, while sitting on his balcony, he noticed her again. She was moving around her yard, occasionally glancing toward him, and he realized that the curiosity in her eyes had transformed into something more personal, something more emotional. He felt a sense of anticipation, a feeling that this was only the beginning. He knew that at some point this unspoken tension would need to be addressed, one way or another. Armin also began to notice how Leela's behavior affected his own actions. He was more aware of how he moved, how he interacted with the girl he liked, and how he responded to her subtle signals. There was a new layer to his daily life, an unspoken complexity that made every encounter feel more significant. He realized that this was more than casual jealousy. It was the beginning of a story that involved emotions, boundaries, and the quiet art of understanding human feelings. Over the next week, Armin decided to observe and reflect, watching carefully while giving Leela space. He noticed that she seemed to struggle with her emotions. There were moments when her jealousy softened into curiosity, moments when it transformed into genuine warmth, and moments when it was sharp and almost uncomfortable to watch. Each day, he learned a little more about her, a little more about how emotions could be complicated, even in a small neighborhood where everyone knew each other. By the end of the week, Armin had formed a quiet understanding. Leela was no longer just a neighbor. She was a person with feelings, emotions, and desires that intersected with his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. The situation was delicate, but it was also fascinating. He realized that if handled carefully, this tension could become a bridge between them, a way to build understanding, trust, and perhaps even friendship, or something more. And so, life continued in the small neighborhood. Armin continued to spend time with the girl he liked, enjoying their laughter, conversation, and the soft, comfortable moments they shared. Leela continued to observe, her presence quiet but noticeable, her emotions slowly revealing themselves in subtle gestures and fleeting glances. The days were calm on the surface, but underneath, there was a quiet storm of feelings, curiosity, and anticipation, all building toward a moment that would eventually change the dynamics between them. Armin realized that this was just the beginning of something complex and intriguing. The story of jealousy, affection, and understanding was unfolding slowly, carefully, and he couldn't wait to see how it would develop. The tension was no longer uncomfortable. It was a living, breathing part of their daily lives, a subtle reminder that human emotions were rarely simple, and that sometimes the most interesting stories began in the quietest of ways. Days passed since Armin had noticed Leela's increasingly curious glances, but tonight felt different. There was a particular tension in the air, a quiet electricity that made him feel both excited and cautious. He had been walking through the park with the girl again, laughing over small jokes and sharing stories, when he noticed Leela standing nearby. She wasn't hiding this time. Her posture was straight and her gaze followed them closely. There was no pretense. She was watching, and Armin knew that she had been aware of him and the girl for days now. At first, he hesitated. Should he ignore it and act like nothing was happening? He could feel the girl beside him sensing something, noticing his glances and the slight tension in his face. But he realized that ignoring Leela wouldn't solve anything. She had feelings, emotions that had been quietly simmering for days, and it was clear that the situation could no longer be avoided. He decided to approach it carefully, with a touch of humor and honesty, the way he always handled delicate matters. The girl noticed him slowing down. "What is it?" she asked softly, tilting her head in curiosity. Armin smiled and shrugged. "Just someone I know," he replied. "Nothing serious." But in truth, it was serious enough. Leela had become a part of this story, a presence that needed acknowledgement. As they walked closer to the street where Leela was standing, Armin could see the subtle signs of her emotions. Her eyes were sharp, alert, and yet there was a softness in them, a vulnerability that he hadn't noticed before. It was the kind of look that spoke volumes without a single word. He understood then that she was experiencing a mixture of curiosity, longing, and jealousy, all in a complicated blend. It fascinated him, not in a selfish way, but in a human way. He was witnessing genuine emotion unfold. Finally, they reached a spot where the girl needed to take a different path. She smiled at him warmly and said goodbye, leaving Armin standing there with Leela a few meters away. For a brief moment, the street was quiet, except for the soft rustling of leaves and distant sounds of cars passing. Armin decided that now was the moment to address the situation, playfully but honestly. He walked closer to Leela, keeping a casual stance, his hands relaxed in his pockets. She noticed his approach and tensed slightly, as if unsure whether to step back or stand her ground. Armin stopped a short distance away and gave a small, teasing smile. "You've been watching us for days now," he said gently, almost as if it were a joke. Leela's cheeks flushed slightly and she looked away, fiddling with the edge of her shirt. I was," she started, but her voice trailed off. She wasn't lying. Her curiosity and emotions had driven her to observe, but she wasn't ready to admit it openly. Armin sensed this hesitation and decided to use a little humor to ease the tension. "Well," he said, leaning slightly closer, "if you want your turn next." His voice was soft, playful, and honest all at once. It was not a threat, not a challenge, but an acknowledgement of the tension in the air. Leela froze, her eyes widening slightly, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to slow down, the streetlights casting long shadows that danced quietly across the pavement. Armin could see the mix of emotions in her face. Surprise, embarrassment, curiosity, and something deeper, something that spoke of feelings she had kept hidden for a long time. She didn't answer immediately, her lips slightly parted, her eyes searching his. It was clear that she hadn't expected him to address the situation so directly, yet she couldn't look away. Finally, she let out a small, almost nervous laugh. "You're impossible," she said, shaking her head. The words were light, but her tone carried a weight of emotions she couldn't yet explain. Armin smiled, understanding that the tension had shifted. It was no longer just observation. It was interaction, communication without words, a delicate acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing silently. They stood there for a few more moments, neither speaking, both aware of the unspoken connection between them. Armin noticed the way her eyes softened, the way her posture relaxed slightly, and he realized that this playful confrontation had broken an invisible barrier. She was no longer just the quiet neighbor. She was a person with feelings that intersected with his life in unexpected ways. "Look," Armin said finally, his voice calm but sincere, "I don't want things to be awkward between us. I noticed you've been watching and I thought maybe we should acknowledge it. We don't have to rush anything, but it's better to be honest, don't you think?" Leela hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I guess. I just didn't know how to say anything," she admitted softly. Her voice was quiet, almost shy, but Armin could hear the honesty in it. It was a relief to hear it spoken aloud. For days, he had been trying to understand her emotions, reading her expressions, wondering what this growing tension meant. Now, the truth was finally out in the open. They began to talk more openly, their conversation cautious at first but gradually more comfortable. Leela explained that she had admired him for a long time, though she had never expected him to notice her. Armin listened carefully, appreciating her honesty and the courage it took to express what she felt. He realized that her jealousy had not been malicious. It had been a sign of genuine affection, carefully hidden beneath the surface for fear of rejection or embarrassment. As they continued talking, the tension shifted from awkwardness to connection. Armin used humor sparingly, teasing her gently, making her laugh and easing the lingering discomfort. He could see her relaxing, her eyes sparkling with a mix of relief and curiosity. The playful tone of the conversation allowed them to navigate the delicate emotions without creating pressure or discomfort. At one point, Leela smiled shyly and said, "I didn't mean to make things weird." Armin shook his head, smiling warmly. "You didn't. Honestly, I think this is better than ignoring it. We both understand something now, and it's better to be honest than pretend nothing happened." For the first time in days, Leela seemed fully at ease. She laughed freely, her earlier tension dissolving into a gentle warmth. Armin noticed that the playful dynamic between them had shifted into something deeper, a mutual understanding that didn't require immediate answers or labels. It was simply acknowledgement, a recognition of feelings that had been quietly growing. As the night deepened, they continued walking slowly down the street. The streetlights created a soft glow around them, casting shadows that intertwined as they walked side by side. They spoke of ordinary things, books, movies, neighborhood events, but beneath the surface there was an unspoken layer of understanding. Each glance, each small gesture carried a subtle message, a silent acknowledgement of emotions that neither had dared to confront until now. By the time they reached the corner where they would part ways, the air was filled with a gentle calm. Leela stopped and looked at him, her expression a mixture of curiosity, warmth, and something he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being honest. For not making it awkward." Armin smiled, his heart feeling light. "Of course," he replied, "we all have feelings. It's better to recognize them than ignore them." As they said goodbye and Leela walked back toward her house, Armin realized that the playful confrontation had achieved more than he expected. It had broken the barrier of unspoken tension, transformed awkwardness into connection, and opened a path for honest communication. He knew that the next days would bring more challenges, more emotions to navigate, but for now, there was a quiet satisfaction in having addressed the situation with care, humor, and understanding. That night, as Armin reflected on the events, he realized that human emotions were rarely simple. Jealousy, affection, curiosity, and honesty could all intertwine in ways that were unexpected and beautiful. Leela's feelings had been genuine, and by acknowledging them playfully and sincerely, he had strengthened their connection rather than creating distance. The story of their relationship was far from over, but tonight had marked an important turning point, a moment of clarity, honesty, and subtle intimacy that would shape the days to come. After the playful confrontation in the street, something between Armin and Leela began to change. The air, which had once been tense with unspoken feelings, now carried a soft warmth, a quiet understanding that neither of them needed to force. In the days that followed, Armin noticed small shifts in her behavior. She smiled more freely when passing by, lingered a little longer in casual conversations, and her eyes held a spark of curiosity that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as Armin was reading on his balcony, he noticed Leela walking past his house. She paused for a moment, her hands clutching a small bag of groceries, and looked up at him. Their eyes met, and this time there was no hesitation, no awkwardness. There was simply recognition, an acknowledgement that both understood something important had begun between them. Armin smiled and waved. She smiled back, a gentle, soft smile that seemed to carry relief, curiosity, and perhaps even a hint of affection. Later that day, he decided to visit her carefully with a small gesture of friendliness. He walked across the street, carrying a cup of freshly brewed tea, and knocked lightly on her door. Leela opened it, surprised but pleased to see him. "Oh, hi," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and caution. "Hi," Armin replied, smiling warmly. "I thought you might like some tea. It's fresh." Leela accepted it, her hands brushing his briefly as she took the cup. There was a brief moment of quiet connection, the kind that spoke louder than words. They stepped onto her small porch and sat down, each holding their cup, savoring the warmth and the silence. Armin could see the subtle tension in her posture, a mixture of shyness and nervous anticipation. He knew that this was a delicate moment, one that required care, patience, and genuine attention. After a few sips of tea, Armin began gently. "Layla," he said softly, "I want to understand you. I've noticed things, your glances, your curiosity. I don't want to misinterpret them, but I do want to hear from you. How do you really feel?" Leela hesitated, her eyes drifting down to her hands, fingers tracing the edge of the cup. I don't know where to start," she admitted quietly. "I've always liked you, Armin. Not in a way I ever expected to say out loud. And seeing you with someone else, it surprised me. I didn't know how to react. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I watched. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it." Armin listened carefully, feeling a mixture of surprise, empathy, and understanding. Her honesty was refreshing, and he could see the courage it took for her to speak so openly. "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to explain everything. I can understand more than you think. I'm glad you told me." Her eyes lifted to meet his, a mixture of relief and vulnerability shining in them. "Really?" she asked softly. "You're not angry?" "No," Armin replied sincerely. "I'm not angry. I just want us to be honest with each other. That's the only way anything good can happen. Jealousy, curiosity, feelings, they're all natural. What matters is how we handle them." For a long moment they sat in silence, letting the words sink in, letting the warmth of the tea and the quiet evening surround them. Leela's shoulders relaxed slightly, and her gaze softened. Armin realized that this was the beginning of something deeper, a foundation of trust, understanding, and careful emotional connection. She finally spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "I think I was afraid that if I told you, everything would change. That you'd see me differently or not at all." Armin reached out gently, his hand hovering near hers without touching, giving her space but signaling presence. "You're brave for telling me," he said softly. "It doesn't change how I see you, not in a bad way. If anything, it makes me respect you more. You've been honest about your feelings, and that's important." A soft smile appeared on Leela's face, and she let out a small laugh, almost like a release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. "I guess I didn't expect this to feel so easy. Talking to you, I mean. I thought it would be awkward, but it's nice." Armin smiled back. "It's supposed to be nice. Feelings don't have to be complicated if we're honest. We can take our time, figure things out slowly. There's no rush." That evening they talked for hours, sharing stories about their childhoods, small dreams, and personal experiences they had never discussed with anyone else. Leela opened up more than she had in years, revealing layers of herself that had been hidden behind shyness and caution. Armin listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and making her feel seen in a way that was both comforting and empowering. The connection between them deepened as the night went on. Armin realized that Leela's earlier jealousy had been a reflection of her desire for closeness, for attention, for acknowledgement. It wasn't about competition or malice. It was about human emotion, the longing to be noticed and understood. And now, with the ice broken, those feelings could be expressed openly, without fear or tension. Days turned into weeks, and their relationship grew slowly, carefully, and naturally. Leela began to spend more time around Armin, sometimes helping him with small tasks in the garden, sometimes joining him for short walks in the neighborhood. Each interaction was infused with gentle humor, playful teasing, and subtle gestures of care. The tension that had once been awkward and sharp transformed into a comfortable closeness, a quiet intimacy that neither rushed nor forced itself. Armin noticed how Leela's eyes would light up when he spoke, how she would lean slightly closer during conversations, and how she seemed more relaxed in his presence than ever before. He realized that their connection had shifted from simple neighborly interactions to something deeper, a bond built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the small park, Armin decided to address another delicate point. "Leela," he began carefully, "I want us to be clear about something. I like spending time with you and I care about your feelings, but I also want to make sure we respect each other's boundaries. We don't have to label anything right now, but I want us to be honest about what we want and how we feel." Leela nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tracing patterns on her cup. "I understand," she said softly. I want to be close to you, that's all. I don't want to complicate things, but I also don't want to hide how I feel anymore." "That's fair," Armin replied. "We'll take it step by step. No rush, no pressure, just honesty, and we'll figure it out together." Over the following days, their bond continued to grow. They shared small adventures, visiting local cafes, watching sunsets from quiet spots in the neighborhood, and simply talking about their dreams and fears. Each moment was filled with the kind of easy intimacy that comes from trust and understanding, moments that were small but deeply meaningful. Armin also observed subtle changes in Leela's demeanor. She laughed more freely, spoke with confidence, and seemed more comfortable in her own skin. It was clear that expressing her feelings had been liberating, a release from months of quiet tension. Armin felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that his careful approach had helped her feel seen and respected. One evening, as the sky turned pink with the setting sun, they sat on the park bench, enjoying the calm of the neighborhood. Leela leaned slightly against him, a gesture of comfort and trust that spoke volumes. "I'm glad we talked," she said softly. "I feel lighter somehow, like I can be myself around you." Armin smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment. "Me too," he replied. "It's amazing what honesty can do. We don't have to rush anything. We can just enjoy being here together." And so, life in the neighborhood continued with a new rhythm. Armin, the girl he had kissed before, and Leela all existed in a delicate balance of emotions, interactions, and understanding. Leela's jealousy had transformed into affection and trust, and Armin's patience and honesty had allowed their bond to deepen naturally. By the end of this chapter in their lives, Armin realized something important. Emotions, even when messy or complicated, could lead to meaningful connections if handled with care. Leela had taken a risk by expressing her feelings, and he had responded with patience, humor, and respect. Together, they had navigated a delicate emotional landscape, turning potential tension into a foundation for friendship, trust, and perhaps something more in the future. Time passed, and life in the small neighborhood had settled into a new rhythm for Armin and Leela. What had started as a fleeting glance of jealousy had evolved into something deeper, a connection built on honesty, respect, and shared understanding. Armin often found himself reflecting on how a simple evening, a small kiss, and a few unspoken feelings could spark such a complex chain of events. It was fascinating, a lesson in human emotions he would never forget. Leela had become a regular presence in his days. She would stop by with a smile, often bringing small things like fresh flowers from her garden, a pastry from the bakery, or simply a story to share. Their interactions were comfortable and easy, filled with laughter, teasing, and thoughtful conversations. It was clear that she had grown more confident, more expressive, and more comfortable in her own skin since opening up. Armin appreciated this growth and admired her for the courage it had taken to express herself. One afternoon, they decided to take a walk in the park where the story had first begun. The sun was warm, casting a golden glow over the trees and benches. Armin noticed the small changes in Leela's demeanor, the way she walked with ease, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way she seemed genuinely happy in the moment. It was a relief and a joy to see her so comfortable, and he realized that their relationship had reached a point of genuine balance. As they strolled along the familiar paths, Leela stopped suddenly, turning to face him with a playful smile. "Do you remember the day you said, 'If you want, your turn next'?" she asked softly, her eyes glinting with humor and curiosity. Armin laughed quietly, remembering the moment clearly. "How could I forget?" he replied. "That was the start of everything, wasn't it?" "Yes," she said, nodding, her smile softening. "I was so nervous. I didn't know how to react, but now I'm glad. It changed everything." Armin felt a warmth in his chest. It wasn't just about that one moment, it was about everything that had followed. The awkward glances, the silent tension, the slow unfolding of trust and understanding. It had all led them here, to a place where honesty and care could guide their relationship. They continued walking, talking about small things, and eventually found a quiet bench under a large oak tree. They sat down, enjoying the gentle breeze and the sound of leaves rustling. For a moment, neither spoke, simply enjoying the calm and the shared presence. Finally, Armin broke the silence. "Leela, I want to say something," he began carefully. "Over the past weeks, I've realized how important honesty and communication are. What we've gone through, your feelings, my observations, it could have been complicated, awkward, or even uncomfortable, but we handled it together, and I think that's what makes it special." Leela looked at him, her eyes softening. "I feel the same," she admitted. "I was afraid at first, afraid that my feelings would push you away. But you made it easy. You listened, you understood, and you never made me feel judged. That means a lot." Armin smiled warmly. "It means a lot to me too. I never want us to ignore how we feel, even if it's confusing. I think us can grow naturally without pressure, without expectations. Just trust, honesty, and time." Leela nodded, her fingers brushing lightly against his. The gesture was small but full of meaning, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey and mutual understanding. The warmth of the sun, the quiet of the park, and the gentle rustling of the trees made the moment feel perfect, a pause in life that allowed them to fully appreciate the connection they had nurtured. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened further. They spent more time together, exploring the neighborhood, trying new cafes, and sharing stories that revealed layers of their personalities and experiences. Leela's playful teasing returned, now softer and more affectionate, while Armin's humor and patience complemented her warmth. Each day added a new layer of trust and understanding, reinforcing the delicate balance they had worked so hard to achieve. Armin also began noticing how Leela supported him in small ways, her presence a comforting force in his daily life. She would leave notes with small words of encouragement, help him with little tasks, and share thoughtful observations about the world around them. It was clear that her feelings were sincere, expressed not through grand gestures but through consistency, care, and attention to the small details that mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Casting a warm, golden glow, Armin and Leela sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sky change colors. They didn't need to speak constantly. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a mutual understanding that didn't require words. Occasionally, they would laugh softly at small jokes or comment on the passing birds, but mostly they just enjoyed the quiet companionship. Leela finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Armin, I'm glad we didn't let jealousy or fear control things. It could have been so different, but instead we're here, and I feel happy, really happy." Armin reached out, gently taking her hand. "I feel the same," he said. "I think this is how relationships should be: honest, caring, patient, and full of trust. Nothing forced, nothing rushed, just a connection that grows naturally." She smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I never thought I'd feel this comfortable expressing myself. Thank you for giving me that chance." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied. "For letting me see the real you, and for being brave enough to share your feelings." As the evening faded into night, they stayed together, enjoying the quiet sounds of the neighborhood and the soft glow of the streetlights. The tension that had once existed was gone, replaced by a deep, meaningful connection. They had navigated jealousy, curiosity, and unspoken emotions, turning potential conflict into a foundation of trust, understanding, and mutual care. Over the next few months, their relationship continued to grow steadily. Armin and Leela learned to communicate openly, share their thoughts and feelings, and support each other in small but significant ways. They laughed, they explored, and they discovered more about themselves and each other with every passing day. What had begun as a moment of jealousy had blossomed into friendship, trust, and the quiet beginnings of love. The girl from the park, who had once shared a fleeting kiss with Armin, remained a part of their story too, but in a way that was respectful and uncomplicated. She continued her friendship with Armin, but the dynamic had shifted naturally. Armin had learned to balance relationships with honesty and care, ensuring that no one felt hurt or neglected. Leela's feelings were acknowledged and respected, and the girl understood the boundaries and trust that had developed. One sunny afternoon, Armin, Leela, and the girl went for a small picnic in the park, sharing food, stories, and laughter. The atmosphere was light, joyful, and completely comfortable. Leela's earlier jealousy was now replaced with playful camaraderie, her confidence and happiness shining brightly. Armin felt grateful for the journey they had all experienced, the lessons in honesty, patience, and emotional understanding that had transformed potential tension into connection and growth. By the end of the story, Armin reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that human emotions were rarely simple. Jealousy, curiosity, affection, and honesty were intertwined in ways that could be both complicated and beautiful. What mattered was how people handled these feelings, with care, respect, and communication. Leela's bravery, combined with his patience, had turned a potentially awkward situation into a meaningful, lasting connection. As the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, Armin and Leela walked side by side, hands brushing occasionally, their laughter mixing with the gentle sounds of the evening. The story that had begun with a playful kiss, a jealous glance, and a few unspoken words had grown into something far more meaningful, a story of trust, understanding, and the slow, beautiful unfolding of human connection. They didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but for the first time it didn't matter. They had each other's trust, honesty, and care, and that was enough to face anything together. The lessons of patience, openness, and empathy would guide them in the days to come, ensuring that their connection remained strong, genuine, and full of warmth. And so, the story concluded, not with dramatic declarations, but with quiet, meaningful understanding. A simple kiss had sparked curiosity, jealousy, and honesty. Those emotions had been nurtured into trust, care, and mutual respect, creating a relationship built on the true foundation of human connection. In the small neighborhood, under the soft glow of streetlights and the gentle rustle of leaves, Armin and Leela walked together, ready to face whatever the future might bring, knowing that honesty and understanding would guide their way.